Measuring cognitive objectives. We're first going to talk about performance-based assessments. So specifically, we're going to look at projects and portfolios. These are all forms of cognitive assessments. So projects require students to apply what they've learned to complete the project. Some types of projects that you might see are class brochures, posters, performance critiques, so critiquing their own performance or their peers' performance evaluations, so evaluating the competition and planning a strategy, and individualized fitness program can also be looked as a project. A portfolio is a little bit different than a project. A portfolio is a purposeful, integrated collection of actual exhibits and work showing effort, progress, or achievement in one or more areas. A portfolio is going to present a broad, genuine picture of what the student is learning. So let's talk about some characteristics of portfolios. First, portfolios need to be flexible and multidimensional forms of assessment. So as a teacher, you need to make sure that portfolios are encompassing a broad range of things and not just focusing on one thing. You should be flexible for what students want to include in their portfolio as long as it's covering the criteria. Portfolios are going to include documents of student progress, of student improvement, and achievement of their goals. It's going to promote student choice, self-evaluation, and reflection of the student's learning process. Most of all, it's important to understand that portfolios provide feedback and continuous evaluation of student progress and towards their goals. So not just for the student, but also for the teacher. It provides increased motivation to students and teachers because it is a non-traditional form of assessment and a little bit more fun than taking a cognitive test. The last thing that you should understand is that portfolios are going to spotlight student achievement and the promotion of the physical education program. So there's different types of portfolios. There's working portfolios, so portfolios that are ongoing. There's showcase portfolios, so something that is going to showcase a specific element or project. There's thematic portfolios, so you can choose a theme for a portfolio and then the students have to be creative fulfilling that theme. There can be multi-year portfolios, so often the portfolios that we do here at Wayne State are multi-year. They're looking at the progress that you have made as a teacher beginning until the end. And then you'll continue to update that portfolio as you go. There's group portfolios, so it doesn't have to be worked on by itself. And electronic portfolios. So understand that an electronic portfolio might encompass other types of portfolios, but the main thing about the electronic portfolio is that it's all electronic or online. So let's talk about a little bit about portfolio guidelines in performance-based assessment. So the first thing that you want to make sure you do is identify the learner outcomes that are going to be demonstrated through the portfolio assessment. You need to then develop and communicate these guidelines to the students. This is so important. If you're not clear and you don't give clear guidelines to your students, then the students are not going to feel confident in the portfolios that they are producing. You need to build flexibility into your class schedule. So if students have questions about the portfolios that they are creating, or they have things that they need to do to put into their portfolio, that they're able to do this within the class schedule to a certain degree. You also need to provide a variety of performance-based learning and assessment opportunities for the students. Guide students as they generate portfolio ideas. So you ultimately know and the students know what you are going to be grading. So help the students as they are generating their portfolio ideas so that they're on the right track. And then it's important to provide students the opportunity to share or showcase their portfolios because a lot of hard work goes into portfolios, and so it's important for students to be able to share their work. The last thing that I want to talk about is evaluating a portfolio. So as I kind of stated before, you want to make sure that you create and use a scoring rubric to evaluate the portfolios. As we've talked, the qualitative rubric would be best for evaluating a portfolio, and the rubric should be given to the students when they are given the assignment, because this rubric is going to essentially guide them for what they need to include within the portfolio. The rubric should include 3 or 4 levels of performance, and it should include specific description of criteria for each level of the performance. The portfolio assessment process holds a lot of promise for teachers who are willing to challenge themselves and their students, but it does take a lot of time up front to create. So as you are creating a portfolio assignment, it's going to take you a long time to create a rubric to give sample ideas to students. And the more time that you put into it, the better that the students are going to be able to understand what the project is about, and the better their portfolios will be on the backside. So the next thing we're going to talk about is written tests. There's different types of test types: mastery and achievement. The type of test you plan to administer will help you decide on the type and nature of questions you're going to use. So mastery tests are used to determine whether a student has achieved enough knowledge to meet some minimum requirement that's set by you, the teacher. These tests are like CPR tests for certification. Students must get 80% or better to pass or to master the task. Achievement tests are used to discriminate among different levels of accomplishment, most commonly used in physical education when evaluating the cognitive domain. So your book talked about something called the Table of Specifications. The Table of Specifications is very important. And you are going to use this in your assignment when you create your cognitive test. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking here on the Table of Specification, but there is also a separate video that you're going to watch specifically to the Excel sheet that is attached within this module. And that is going to explain how you will actually use the Table of Specification to help you create your cognitive assessment. So the first thing that you need to understand is that in the Table of Specifications, content objectives might include stuff like history, values, equipment, etiquette, safety, rules, strategy, and technique of play. Psychomotor skills can also be put into that category. There are also educational objectives to include, and these are your Bloom's taxonomy categories that they talked about at the beginning of the chapter on page 113. So the categories for Bloom's taxonomy were knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. The words in parentheses are just another descriptor of Bloom's taxonomy. So for knowledge, those are things that are remembered. Comprehension, the students are going to understand. Application, the students are going to apply. Analysis is to analyze something. Synthesis is to evaluate something. And evaluation is to create something. So here's a very small example of a table of specifications for a 60-item test. So for this test, this is just a small example, okay? But for this test, you have your educational objectives, so our Bloom's taxonomy categories, remember and understand. And then you have your content objectives, so history and values. For your content objectives, you look at your unit plan and you decide how much time is spent in each section for your content objectives. So for history, how much time of your unit do you spend on teaching history of the game? And then you give a percentage weight to that. The percentage weight will then calculate how much of that should be questions for remember and how much should be questions for understanding. So what this does here is tell us a total percentage of the questions for remember and a percentage for the questions of understand, essentially telling us that we should have one question on history that's a remember question, and 1 question on history that's an understand question. Similarly, if we spent 10% on values, we would have 3% of our total questions, or 2 questions for remember of values, and we would have about 1 question for understanding those values. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to go and look at the specification video, the separate one, and it's going to explain this Excel sheet. And right now, after you watch that video, I want you to pause this video and I want you to do the activity that is labeled for table of specification.